For a group that's been together for many, many years, we have relatively few tech issues. We had one this morning. We apologize, but thank you always to Mandolina for making this possible, for coordinating everyone. And we also want to thank the Jewish Federation of the Desert that helped sponsor this program and other interfaith programs that we do. As I say, the sun is shining through. I don't know what it's like right now in Texas. I know there was some cold weather in other parts of the country as well. Don, I think you had cold weather where you were, but
Yeah,
we see that everybody's safe. Um, Steve had asked me to say a few words about Israel-Palestine at the beginning of today's study session, as we did so many times in these horrible years that have passed. Um, so the first thing is Shavach v'Hodaya, praise and thanksgiving for the fact that the final body of the hostage was returned to Israel. Dan has come home to his family and his friends, some of whom I know, which doesn't mean anything other than the usual thing you hear from Israelis is that it's never more than twice removed. It's a small country, and a lot of things happen to a lot of people. And I will say al achat kama v'chama, and all the more so to Palestinians that have been involved either in Gaza or the West Bank or in Lebanon or in Syria or wherever Palestinians live and wherever other people in the world live who are being persecuted, who are being bombed. I'm not talking about people who are taking up weapons for terror purposes. I'm talking about everybody on the side, and that's the majority of the cases, whether it's Tehran or Somalia or Darfur or wherever it might be happening. So what is happening? Not much. Elections will hopefully happen in October as they are slated to be by law. I cannot remember a government that lasted the full 5 years. In my years of being an Israeli, it doesn't mean it didn't happen, but I don't think so. And possibly the worst government we ever had. I say this as an Israeli, and I say this as a Jewish supporter of the right of the state of Israel to exist. And with great, great criticism as the most horrible government, the bloodiest government, the most immoral government that we've ever had. Um, and and in the same way that we're worrying here in the United States about what the next elections might look like, I'm worried for Israel as well. I'll have more to say in May. I'll be making a visit in a few months, a little bit, get out into the country more than my last visit. And we'll be able to let you know how that's going. Campaigning in Israel goes on for a very, very long time. Unfortunately, there is not a lot of new blood in the center left to left world. One piece of good news is that the Arab parties have, I'm pretty sure it looks like they've reunited again into a single list, which is good because you've got to have a certain amount of votes in order to get in, got to pass a certain
threshold.
threshold, thank you, to get into the Knesset, and a number of parties, including my own party Meretz, did not even get in last year. It doesn't mean that they didn't have 1/20th of the vote. It just meant that I think it's between 2 and 3 members of Knesset you have to have. And so we can only hope. We can only hope, and we can only and hope and support organizations that are working towards mutual work together. Some of us were present at a video conference with representatives of an organization called Omdim Biachad, Standing Together. I've been in touch with this organization for 4 years now. Long before the war, these were Palestinians with Israeli citizenship and Jewish Israelis who were working together in places like Haifa on civil issues like wages, fair wages, and domestic violence. Things that were not the big problem. Let's tackle the things that are right in front of us, but let's do it together. And they always end their presentations. They always have a Palestinian and a Jewish Israeli, and the Palestinian is an Israeli citizen. I don't know all that. I think so. I think that's their modus operandi. They always end their presentations, which I think perhaps they should start with sometimes, is that I'm not going anyplace. The other one says, I'm not going anyplace. We need to work together to get this done. And that's the bottom line. There's too much zero sum thinking going on both sides. I won't speak for the Arab side, for the Muslim and the Christian and the Palestinian side, but I will speak for the Jewish side. There's just still too many people in this world who wish and pray the Palestinians would simply disappear. And whether they just keep it in their hearts or whether they bring it to implementation, as Ben-Gvir is doing and his friends, it's still the evil part of Judaism. It is the Satan in the synagogue, as opposed to the Satan synagogue. It is the Satan in the synagogue, and I don't mean Satan in a good way right now. So, yeah, yeah. Other organizations that I'm in touch with on a regular basis are Rabbis for Human Rights. Just last week, I went to hear their director, Rabbi Abi Dabush, who's a really interesting guy from Ashkelon, grew up in the religious Orthodox, in the modern Orthodox Zionist community in Ashkelon, Mizrahi. That is, is from Arab. His family hails from Arab lands. Often not part of the liberal camps, very often towards the right. He grew up in a right-wing environment. He found himself at some point at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem studying for the rabbinical program and then moved to Hartman and has ordination from Hartman's relatively new program. So Rabbi Dabush is also a member of, I think, Be'eri, one of the kibbutzim where slaughter happened on October 7th, is a survivor and is back there rehabilitating his family. So he speaks with an integrity. He speaks with street cred of somebody who still wants these things to happen. He's doing amazing, amazing things, especially in the West Bank, helping to testify to provide presence so that when the settlers come to wreak havoc with the Palestinian farmers, there's somebody there to try to prevent it because the army's not preventing it, and somebody there to document it. So Rabbis for Human Rights standing together. Another one is Tag Meir, which is a relatively loose-knit group of Israelis, still an organization, loose-knit group of Israelis that every time there is a terrorist attack against Palestinians done by Jews, they're there to help out. And they're also there when there's a terrorist attack, Palestinians against Jews. They really make a point to be in both places, but unlike everybody coming up, helping out a family or community that's been affected by Palestinian terrorism, um, there's no other Jewish organization really that reaches out. Rabbis for Human Rights do as well. So Tag Meir, if you're looking to help support these organizations, I know a little bit more about it. Happy to put you in touch. Personally, where my family is able to help these organizations as well this time. Those are the things that give me hope, right? And prayer and study together and doing the kind of things that we're doing, although this is a cinch, right? Okay. So Steve, those are my kind of comments, letting out a bunch of things that have been on my mind.
Thank you.
Um, Anybody want to ask anything or make a comment before we go on?
Did I hear you say that Hartman is now accredited to uh, train rabbis and
No, I
educate?
said that Hartman is ordaining rabbis. Accreditation is not a thing really.
Uh-huh.
You can get accreditation for academic. You need accreditation for academic degrees in Israel and America, like most places. But in Judaism, really any organization can set up shop and say we're ordaining rabbis. There is one person I know that some of us know who studied the rabbinate entirely online, except for maybe 2 or 3 day-long seminars in New York City. I did it online. At least, thankfully, he doesn't take himself that seriously with the rabbinic title and ordination, because there's only so much you can learn in a year or 2 years, whatever it took, online. But there are a number of programs now online, especially for people who it's their second or third career. The AJR, Academy for Jewish Religion, is one on the East Coast, a separate one on the West Coast. The whole world of rabbinic training is going through a lot of turmoil, a lot of self-reflection, and uh,
Mm.
I have a lot to say about that, but I don't know that that's so appropriate right now.
Mm.
What it feels like to me, Steve, is that, and I think perhaps you can identify this as having a rigorous training, not only in theology and practical ministering pastoral care, but also academic rigor. Um, a lot of the many of the rabbis, especially second career rabbis, folks that are coming out of these ordinations, I don't find the depth of knowledge, depth of learning, depth of experience. And I don't know what to do with that. I want to be open to people. I certainly will be respectful to everybody, but there's a different. It used to be that if you got through a place like Jewish Theological Seminary, they didn't graduate everybody. There's people that didn't last, and so I don't know what to do with that because I want to be open to everybody. I want everybody to study for the. I want to to continue their studies in any way. Um, but Hartman is a little bit different because have a high standard, and the people that were involved in this ordination program, as far as I know, are very knowledgeable themselves. So it's not the blind leading the blind. It's very much, and in this case, in Rabbi Dabush, he's certainly a great example of somebody you know, I think, yeah. So it's not accreditation, but yes, they have been doing it over the last few years, 2, 3 years maybe.
Recognition in Israel is another matter.
Yes. So the whole thing of rabbinic recognition is a strange thing, but I would imagine it's the same thing here in different communities, Steve, with pastors that set up shop, and where does that title come from, and what, how did, and also the question, does it matter? I don't know. I don't really know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But anybody that's ordained in the United States on anything can do a marriage, civil things. But in Israel, it's totally restricted by the well, the state restricts it by the rabbinate for Jews and the other.
Right.
By
So
the
it's
Haredi communities.
it's actually it's called the King's Law. There's something in Israeli law that is the section called the King's Law. It's been taken directly from the British Mandate period and not updated really at all. And that is when it comes to family status, whether it's marriage or divorce, the official who can decide on that is the head honcho of each of those things. So it's the chief rabbi. Chief rabbi was instituted by the mandate in Britain. That okay? It's the
Mhm.
chief whatever imam, the chief Lutheran person, the Lutheran bishop, the Episcopal bishop. Everyone they all have their own areas, and they're the ones that can decide whether somebody's married. And that's a law that has been challenged for decades now. And we really thought with the influx of Russian immigration in the 80s that would change because so many of them were not Jewish halachically. That is, their mothers were not Jewish, but they had Jewish lineage, so they could come to Israel and be accepted as Israeli citizens. Um, and Avigdor Lieberman, who's been around in politics for a long time, that was his main thing. But it's just not happening because the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, are always needed to form a government and a linchpin. It's one of these anyway, too much. Um, Maybe it's time to go back, or for this group, we should do an interfaith group. I did a series of workshops a few years ago. Last we did it at your house, if you remember, called I think I called it Israelity. Israelity, one word. It was, and one of the sessions was about the Knesset. Another one was about Haredim. Another one was about the settlers. Do you remember when we did that, Les?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. And so I was kind of proud to put together, audiovisual kind of stuff from TV, some of it comic. How do Israelis see themselves in film and movies? Maybe it's time to do an interfaith version of that as well at some point.
Hmm.
Can I make a comment here, Rabbi? My time in Israel, and I've spent a lot of time and made many trips. I find Israeli society to be generally secular, not at all. I find the American communities more religious than I find a lot of the Israeli communities.
It's kind of apples and oranges, Ajit. So first of all, in Haifa, where you spend a lot of time, Haifa is known to be, or Haifa, as people might say here, is known to be a relatively secular city. It's only in
Yeah.
Haifa that the municipal buses run on Shabbat. Other places around Israel, they don't. Well, now there's alternative things, but that's the official buses don't. Um, and so that's one issue. But the apples and oranges thing is that when you're in Mea Shearim, as you would be in maybe some deep South community, or maybe in Dearborn, from a Muslim
Mhm.
point of view, in certain areas, the neighborhood is definitely feels religious. Society, by and large, the people in the Knesset, it used to be the vast majority, now it's still the majority, are not observing halakhically observant Jews. But and the air around you is not spiced with God talk and Ten Commandments being put up everywhere. In that way, I think that's what you're referring to. On the other
Mhm.
hand, the national calendar, the official calendar, is based on the Jewish calendar,
It
and
is.
while Purim is not a day off per se from work, but you'll see kids running around in costumes everywhere the whole day. You'll see people showing up at work with a costume. Now, is that that's not theological, right? But it's religious, cultural. Cultural and religion. In Judaism, I hope that's one of the messages we're getting here, is all kind of farblungent. It's all kind of mixed up.
Yeah,
And
it is.
One of
Les,
the
oh, I'm
sayings,
sorry, Les, and then Don. I think you wanted to ask something.
Yeah.
one of
Oh,
I was going to
ju-
say one of the great sayings is that the synagogue Israelis don't go to is a very Orthodox synagogue.
Right. Although that is a bit of the past, though, Les. I know people keep saying that, and people love to say that. But the truth of the matter is, there are by now probably 300, my guess is, or at least 300, and Israel's a small place, 300 non-Orthodox synagogues that work on a regular basis in different ways. And many of those have been influenced. They do it in a very Israeli way, but they've been influenced by American Jewry. I will say mostly Upper West Side Manhattan Jewry, but it's a strong connection there. Yes, but Don, you wanted to say something a while ago. Sorry.
I was going to ask you, do you think that this is the fault of seminaries or schools? A, because they're so expensive, and B, that the teachings really don't filter down to the common people?
That's being talked a lot about. I don't know what's being talked about in the Christian world. It's being talked about a lot about in the Jewish world in the last few months. A report came out, which I began to look at and decided not to. I'm not in that world anymore. And while I was involved in rabbinic training for 17 years in Israel with an independent organization that I ran called Rikma, my goal was to supply the things to the rabbis that would enable them to be successful in the field, not as academics and not as chaplains, which didn't exist at the time, although one of my fellows went on to be the first chaplain in Israel, by teaching them things for the spirit, which weren't being covered in both Reform and Conservative school, which had to do with Hasidic literature, meditation, things that were considered to be beyond the purvey, that is beyond Talmud or modern Jewish philosophy, that kind of stuff. Another thing was organizational work. I had them do fundraising courses. I mentored them in fundraising, in group dynamics. I exposed them to people from different religions, people whose their expertise was community building as opposed to just being a good rabbi, right? Who's a community builder? So if there was a famous Druze person who had renewed his community in the Carmel Mountains, because let's talk to him. A musician from the South who was a rock musician who built a whole cadre of young rock musicians coming out of the southern part of Israel, which was thought to be, not the epicenter of culture. Those are the things that I took upon myself. Today, there's one school that has just gone free. A number of the schools are becoming very free. They're shortening from a 5-year to a 4-year to a 3-year program. Um, so I think people are working on it, Don, and I'm guessing the same thing's happening in the Christian world as well.
Okay.
Oh, all right. And speaking of which, the combination of real life and theology and reality, here, we're thrown into the things that we've been talking about until now in an intense way in this chapter, in chapter 3. Don, you raised the issue of theology. Others and you have raised the issues of what the Hebrew Bible is echoing in the words here. We're going to have a lot of that today, and not only looking backwards, but also looking forwards into the New Testament. Okay, so Don, why don't you lead us off with the first I tried to break them up maybe they're in like 4, 5, 6 lines at a time. Let's see if you can read the section at a time. You can see where the breaks are. There's 2 columns, of course, right? Please go
Yes.
ahead.
You want me to do double trouble, Tobit 3?
Yes, please.
Okay. Then with much grief and anguish of heart, I wept, and with groaning, I began to pray. You are righteous, O Lord, and all your deeds are just. All your ways are mercy and truth. You judge the world. And now, O Lord, may you be mindful of me and look favorably upon me. Do not punish me for my sin or for my unwitting offenses or for those of my ancestors. They sinned against you and disobeyed your commandments. So you gave us over to plunder, exile, and death, to become the talk, the byword, and an object of reproach among all the nations among whom you have dispersed us. And now your many judgments are true in dealing with me according to my sin. For we have not kept your commandments and have not walked in accordance with truth before you. So now deal with me as you will. Command my spirit to be taken from me, so that I may be released from the face of the earth and become dust. For it is better for me to die than to live, because I have listened to undeserved insults, and great is the sorrow that attends me. Command, O Lord, that I be released from this distress. Release me to go to the place of eternity. And do not, O Lord, turn your face away from me. For it is better for me to die than to see so much distress in my life, and better not to listen to insults.
Oh boy, a lot there, huh? Lot to talk about. So maybe before we get into the weeds, what's the overall impression that you read so beautifully, Don? What's our overall impression of this?
I see the man recognizing something wrong in his or her life, a person recognizing something wrong in his or her life, and I see him striving for being released from that guilt and doing it in a form of prayer and unity with God.
Yeah. I find this somewhat distressing, objectionable almost, to think that for my little sins or for my little indiscretions or whatever, God comes down so hard on me and my descendants. It almost sounds, almost says there's a God, but he's quite unjust because he gets me, zaps me for every little thing, and he will zap my children and grandchildren for every little thing I did. It just doesn't sit well with me.
Les?
I mean, I would agree with that, but I think as I look back on life, there's so many things that I see in my family are a result of the consequences of what I did and how I thought, even with eyes of doing well at the time I was doing it. I mean, the continuum of personality traits and learning seems to flow through generations, um, not to the punishment of them, but I can recognize the elements, so to speak. I can recognize it.
Yeah, Les, go ahead, Les.
So maybe Megan can correct me, but I think he meets the definition of clinical depression, perhaps without suicidal ideation yet. But he wants God to kill him, not himself.
I think he's very depressed, very depressed.
Yeah.
But I think here's a man whose psyche gets the better of his ego during his passage. Hi, Megan.
I
Let's
done.
let's remember the man was blinded by bird shit, right? And this is after he's done so much good in the world, taking care, but also what he's been doing a lot is burying the dead. As I mentioned, one of the statistics is that so many of these verses of this entire book deal with death one way or another. It's a lot of death lying around here.
Mhm.
Maybe a reaction to Ajit, this idea of punishment, to flip what you said, as opposed to look at all the world's going to pot because of the things that I did, he gives the historical context. My people have done wrong. And in that way, he's right in line with the Deuteronomic, what we call the Deuteronomistic um, editing of the historiographical books of the Hebrew Bible. That is,
Uh, Rabbi, I'm thinking hard here, right, how to justify this and how to say this. There's a time in Jewish history when Jews are being killed in the world, left and right, all over the world, because supposedly there was a time when your ancestors killed Jesus. And that punishment is being visited upon future generations. And that's what this is saying to me. This is saying that God does that all the time. He punishes future generations for what. And not that I believe the Jews killed Jesus. I don't believe that at all. Nevertheless, that's how history has been written. That's how history has been talked about. And that's why this bothers me, I think.
okay. So first point, this is a few centuries before that, as you well know.
Mhm.
This is Jewish self-reflection, and
Mhm.
it's in the spirit of Jewish self-reflection from the Hebrew Bible. I'm not taking a position, just kind of that's what's going on here on one hand. Um, and then, and to me, that's what's interesting here. It's not just my people I'm suffering for. And that's what happened with Ezekiel on the banks of the river Kfar when he said to the people, stop saying that, my parents ate sour grapes and therefore I'm suffering. I'm suffering for my parents' sin. No more of that. Everybody has to own up to their own sins. And he brings himself into it. And he says, I too, right? I have not, we have not, and I have not. He includes himself in that as well. We didn't see that kind of behavior, other than perhaps him mistreating his wife in the previous chapter. But then there's another issue as far as the good Jewish tradition of the Hebrew Bible. I mean, we've heard this before. Have we not seen this scene play out before? Anybody reminiscent of anybody or anybody in biblical literature? Yeah,
What
Megan.
about Job?
Megan, did you want to say something?
Just the line, I know this is from somewhere, maybe a psalm. Command, O Lord, that I be released from this distress. Release me to go to the place of eternity, and do not, O Lord, turn your face away from me. It almost brings
Hmm.
tears to my eyes. He's in
Wow.
so much grief, but for it is better for me to die than to see so much distress in my life, and better not to listen to insults. So it's a deep uh, grief, but in asking God not to turn his face from me, which would be the
Hmm.
worst of all. And that comes from somewhere. You'll have to tell me, Rabbi.
Well, it's a theological grief, and I mean the
Yeah.
characters, biblical characters that come to mind, aside from, as Don pointed out, Job, is Elijah.
Not
Elijah.
to.
He doesn't get his way,
Mhm.
and Jonah, of course. And there's a lot of parallels
But,
between Jonah
but
and this.
God kind of turns on Eliyahu when he says that. He says, "Stop whining. You want to die. If you wanted to die, you should have stayed with Ahab. Stop
Yeah,
whining." He tells him to go and anoint Elisha because he was so whiny and
right.
complaining and
Yeah.
saying, "This is my lot."
Uh,
right?
um,
Not all role models are good role models.
yeah.
It's true. Mhm.
Rabbi, I spent 7 years as a docent at the Holocaust Museum in Houston. So some of this is my personal reaction to knowing that whole history of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So,
And that's why we're doing this, right? We're doing
yeah.
this to exchange these kinds of things. But so if we step back from the prayer for a second, which is just a thing about prayer in this type of literature, then I'm going to ask Steve to maybe talk about the format of the prayer. Um, in this book of Tobit, right before something important is about to happen, there's a prayer. And that's a literary device, not just here. We find it in Judith. We find it in the additions, the Septuagint, the Greek translations, additions to the book of Esther and Jeremiah, I think, as well. And maybe Daniel, there's a prayer. And we find it in other ancient forms of Jewish commentary, like the Targum, the Aramaic translations mostly to the Torah, where in the biblical text, the character doesn't pray because that wasn't yet part of the mindset of the biblical writers, but the prayers are added into the translation. And so this is telling us something important is about to happen. But Steve, maybe something on the form of the prayer?
Yeah, and I would also like to reflect on what's been said. I think of King Josiah, right, and the so-called rediscovery of the Deuteronomic scrolls and the reforms of tearing down the high places and reorganizing everything really focused on the temple at Jerusalem. Um, and and this book of Tobit seems very Deuteronomic in that Tobit himself he goes to Jerusalem to worship. He's Jerusalem Judah focused, and this tit for tat that we've disobeyed the commandments. God is just in punishing us, and that those who are blessed are obedient, and those who are punished are disobedient. And that kind of syllogism makes it difficult for me to trust a God like that. I get it, and yet it feels like a reform that was uh, maybe needed for reordering society. Maybe things were getting a little too far afield, and yet the implications of that Deuteronomic theology are carried on into our own day, right? We all tend to follow a syllogism that I'm on bad times. What have I done to deserve that or whatever? So my first comment is this grief and this affliction that Tobit feels for being punished, and yet he had done so well. He's kind of like Job in that sense. It's like I didn't violate the law, and yet I'm being punished. And yet I do love, and Megan pointed to this, that he continues to be in a relationship with God. So he's wrestling with that. But at the same time, I think of, and you mentioned Ezekiel, I think of some of the other prophets who 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 kind of they don't correct the Deuteronomic tit for tat thinking as much as offer a more transcendent or a larger perspective in terms of that's just my take on so far on Tobit. But in terms of the liturgical piece, yeah, these are classic genres of uh, at least in the Episcopal prayer book that go back to the earliest forms of monastic prayer, which were all taken from the synagogue worship. yeah, of the Hebrews in the Hebrew text. And so the genre of confession of I have sinned and woe is me and have mercy on me is big. The genre of praise, you are righteous, you are holy, holy, holy. Um, the a lot of the Psalms remind me, which are liturgical pieces taken from worship as well, of that. So yeah, I think when I look at it that way in terms of the genres of prayer, this is all fits in it's reminiscent of my own prayer life through the Episcopal liturgy, which are offered for different occasions in different ways. But
What could you just, for those of us that aren't used to going to church, what would be kind of the usual liturgical format for Mass? Whether it's, I think it's probably the same for Catholics as it is for Episcopalians. What
yeah,
is
well, there's the liturgy of the Word,
okay?
which are readings from the Hebrew Scripture, a Psalm, a New Testament epistle, and the Gospel. And those may have hymns interspersed. Then comes the sermon, the reflection on the readings, much like in the synagogue. Then comes the affirmation through the creed, and then comes a confession and absolution. And then is the liturgy of the table, the communion liturgy, where the offertory is taken, not just the money, but all that we are and all that we have is offered, and then that's taken uh, and and uh, and blessed and broken and then distributed through the bread and wine as bread and wine. And and that liturgy in and of itself has the holy, 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 the what do you call that, David? The
I call it the
Doxology.
cut. I
Kadosh,
call
yeah,
the
yeah,
kadosh,
cut.
kadosh.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Cut.
So it's really ancient Jewish liturgy that got inserted into monastic communities, liturgies of the hours, daily offices, weekly communion. It's all totally grounded in the Jewish understanding of God and prayer, with the table added, the Eucharistic table. And in the early Jewish Christian community, when the earlier followers of the way of Jesus as Messiah, since they were all observant Jews, the first time they could celebrate together and break bread would be after the Sabbath, which would be Sunday morning. And that's kind of how the Eucharist got placed on Sundays early on. And then it's been also reinforced or rationalized as the day of resurrection um, and so forth. But
Thank you. I think it's for me, it's important to I see in Tobit here, this section and other sections, as that's a milestone on the way to that development for biblical offerings, which weren't prayer at all. They were always private or public prayer, which is in the Psalms, to like formats. And reading this to me and seeing this format reminded me a lot of my experiences in church. Rabbi Malka, I think you want to say something, and then Don.
I was thinking that Tobit takes very seriously why he hasn't done anything, but he takes responsibility because that idea is woven throughout the Tanakh that we have corporate responsibility, that if one person sins, they can contaminate the whole community. And I thought about even Yom Kippur liturgy. It's not I have done this, I have done this, it's not I have sinned, I have gone astray, I have not fed the poor, whatever it is. It's we. So I think Tobit fits right in with the general idea of Judaic, if you want to say quote unquote theology, that we have corporate responsibility and it's not just the individual.
Love that point. Don, I know you want to say something. I want to relate a story that I I never know with whom I've shared it, but this idea of grief towards wanting to give up on life, yet on the other hand, still having a relationship with the Holy One. When I was working with HIV/AIDS in the 90s, especially in Israel, I would go down to the hospice, and one of the members who from the committee, he himself, his AIDS got worse, and he was on his last few weeks. I went to visit him, and he came from a religiously observant household, always wore a kippah, and so he's in bed. And this was a hospice with 7 beds, and they were allowed to have their animals there, and they were allowed to smoke also. So he's smoking in bed. If you can imagine, I can't imagine that in the United States. He's smoking in bed. I come in with a student, a rabbinical student from LA, who was there for the year and wanted to shadow me in doing this work. I come and I said, Ellie, how are you doing today? I said, do you want me to help you put on tefillin, to wrap the straps? And he takes a long draw from his cigarette. Long draw. You know what? He doesn't deserve it.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
we went around, we did the rest of the rounds, and then we're driving back up to Jerusalem. So I said, let's unpack this. She says, that was the saddest thing I've ever seen. I said, what? The man who wouldn't put on tefillin, who said God doesn't deserve for him to put on tefillin. I said, the saddest thing, I'm filled with joy. He has a relationship with God. He has somebody to be mad at. What a wonderful use of God. That was my relationship. And I was reminded of that here. All this, I want to die, whatever, but I still want to have your face. Now, some people have seen in this echoes of the theology of the world to come, Olam Haba. Um, Carrie Moore argues with that. I also don't think we're not there yet. And you may know that's one of the arguments between the Pharisees and the Sadducees that I think is reflected. We're going to see a different argument coming up in a second, which is reflected in the Gospels and in Talmudic literature. I don't think this is yet about the concept of a world to come. But I think it's just a mixture of emotions. Don, you wanted to say something.
Yes, I wanted to raise a conversation about this piece compared to David's um, writing in Psalm 51. In this piece, I see what Rabbi spoke about the corporate element being involved. In David's prayer of contrition, I see it to be personal. And in that way, I really agree with Megan. This is deeply felt, what Tobit is saying here. And I wonder what it is in humans that brings us to that point to feel sorrow for the things that we do and have it touch us to our core.
What would 12-step people say here? He hit his rock bottom.
Yeah.
You've got to hit rock bottom to this happen, maybe an overstep. Good. Rita Claire, please, did you want to say something?
I've just find that religion should be giving us peace of mind. And I find that it doesn't always give us peace of mind. It never makes us satisfied with what we've done. It always makes us feel it's not good enough. We have to do better. So you never feel fulfilled. And that can be very distressing and cause you a lot of harm and depression. When your children and in a family are always being praised, but it doesn't seem like it's that way with religion.
Yeah. I have never been to a confessional, but I think the Catholics do it right. You know, just lay all your sins in a little booth and you're
Mhm.
free.
Say, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I
Jeet,
I
I'll
do.
take Jeet, I'll
Huh?
take your confession after our meeting.
No, I was telling somebody I was in Haifa at one of the Baha'i holy shrines with a prayer book, and somebody asked me, "What are you praying for?" And I said, "Forgiveness of sins of the past and forgiveness for sins I'm about to commit in the future." You just
Mhm.
get it all out there.
Rita
Uh,
Claire, I'm taken by what you said in terms of religion creates more dissonance between ourselves and the
Mhm.
ideals or God or whatever the standard may be. Is that the point?
Yes, I've
And
seen
is,
that in my life, in my family, with relationships. Yes, I've
would you
experienced it.
would you agree that there's good religion and bad religion?
I
Because
don't think
religion,
it's,
at its heart, it's to be bound to something that you believe, right? Religare is that idea of ligament. Whatever it is that is our ultimate concern that binds us, that is our religion. And sometimes, like I was saying earlier about the Deuteronomic theology, I get it, but I think it paints a picture of a God that is hard to trust, a God who's going to zap me if I don't follow the line expected of me. Do you have an idea? Can you respond to that? I mean, is there good religion?
Uh, I, I think if you dwell on the mercy of God, there's good religion.
And there's
Yes.
also the same God who says, I'm slow to anger, I'm merciful, full of grace, and slow to anger. Same God.
See, see, I love
And
that. And I
forgiving your
love that
iniquities.
refrain.
Hmm.
Rabbi, I love that refrain that's woven throughout all the whole scripture, right?
I,
And then I love Paul the apostle at the end of Romans uh, chapter 11, where he's wrestling with, why are my brothers and sisters not becoming followers of Christ in the way that
mm,
I hope and wish for? And he finally says, all Israel will be saved, and that God, in fact, consigns all human beings to disobedience. Why? So that he may have mercy on all.
Right.
So that divine attribute of mercy, as Don just pointed out, and as you mentioned, God's slow to anger. He's tenderhearted. His heart gets broken just in the same way as our hearts get broken
no.
in some beautiful stories in the scriptures. So yeah, I think mercy is a clue towards maybe a clue toward on the trail towards finding good religion.
Yeah,
There's another,
Excuse me, I think Rita Claire wanted to respond and then Megan.
I think it depends on the religious leaders and how they present it to their congregations. I think that's really important. Um, I think it's a good thing that you can take out the good in all religions and build on that and not dwell on the negative parts of it.
Thank you. Megan?
I just may have a depressive personality, but this passage so describes deep, deep, deep grief. But
Mm.
as you said about the man with AIDS, um, he's begging God not to turn his face from him. So there's a relationship with God. There's
Mm.
a joke somewhere. I don't know what it is, but that the man who loves God, it takes him 7 reincarnations to get to nirvana. The man who hates God, it only takes him two because he talks to God more.
Mm,
So
I like that.
love
it,
that.
there's
Don,
such beauty in this. At the end of all of this sorrow, I don't even want to live, but don't turn your face from me, God. I don't know. I find this depressively uplifting, if that makes any sense. That's the
Wow.
okay, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I was thinking to Steve's discussion and to the point about mercy, I think there's another element that this prayer shows me, and that is faith. And I think that is another cardinal um, characteristic of our relationship with God. We know that God likes mercy, justice, but God also likes faith.
Okay, so I think that we're not going to go on to the next thing, which is fascinating itself. It's kind of a meanwhile back at the ranch, the same
Yeah.
thing's happening with another character. I will end with another anecdote. Again, apologies if you've already heard me say it. When I was growing up, we were enchanted by Chabad rabbis. We were 14, 13, well, 14, 14, 15. There was one little Chabad, he was a little guy named Naftali Astulin, had a little storefront in Fairfax, in the Fairfax neighborhood of LA. And we were friends. He was just what a wonderful guy, and always filled with always big smile. When I went away to yeshiva, I went on in Israel, and I went on a one-way ticket. I didn't come back until 2 or 3 years later. I went by to see him. He says, "No, give me a big hug. How you doing?" He says, "Tell me about your learning." So I told him the day of learning, we do this and we do that. We study Talmud mostly, almost all Talmud. And then in the evening, we have a half hour of Musar literature. Musar is ethics, the ethical literature that was made prominent by, originally, now it's in liberal circles, made prominent by the non-Hasidic Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox. And so he says, Musar, why you should be learning Hasidus? You should be learning Hasidic literature, which is kind of the competition. And I said, well, yeah, I didn't know what to say. He says, let me tell you the difference between Misnagdim, those who oppose Hasidim, and Hasidim, right? So they're both ultra-Orthodox Jews, right? He says, Misnagdim, they take a bath. They get in the bath and they scrub away their sins like this, and they scrub away whatever. And then when they get up out of the bath, the water sticks to their body. They still have the sins. Hasidim, we get in the shower, we turn on the shower, we scrub away, and whoosh, all down the drain. Two different approaches to confession and wallowing in sin.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
would like to add an anecdote to that. And it goes back to what Megan and Rita Claire have been talking about in terms of the wrestling with the brute mechanistic force of nature and our human condition and the fact that we suffer and people are utterly afflicted all over the world. And so it seems like religion is just grappling with that. And and yet the religion we're raised with, especially the idea of ideals out there that we never measure up to, whether it be God or some law or cultural standard. I was a little boy, fifth grade, and I stole some cigarettes from my mom's purse and got my little brother Craig, who was in third grade, to go behind Mr. Cawthon's garage, and we smoked them. And then my older brother Bill was playing Nashville Cats, this song that was popular, and he sees us across the yard, and he runs out there and he grabs us and he dials my dad's phone, and he said, "Stephen, you've got to tell Dad what you just did." And I was just weeping, and I said, "Dad, I smoked." And he said, "Well, we'll have to talk about that when I get home." So I spent the rest of that day in fear and real affliction for a little kid, thinking everything is going to come down on me. And so I thought of run. I literally, in my little mind, what do I do? I'm just so awful. And older brother just shamed me continually. And then finally, I just decided I'm going to just face it. So Dad's blue Caprice winds down the street, pulls into the driveway. I run up to my father. He opens the door, and I said, Dad, and I'm crying. I said, I'm so sorry. I failed you. And I'm so sorry. And it was worse than I thought. He got out of the car. He had veins in his neck, and he grabs me by the arm and he pulls me over to this back patio, and he said, sit down. And then he points his fingers at me and he says, don't you ever, ever forget, you can never, ever fail me because I love you. Now go wash up and get ready for dinner. And that was the end of it. So that's good leadership, Rita, and set me free. And it's like taking a nice shower and moving on for another day.
What a beautiful way to end our session today.
Yeah.
I'll look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thanks for being here.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Shabbat shalom.
Thanks.